Okay, in this video, I'm going to be going over the interest rates and money supply with a focus on the liquidity preference model. So the first thing that I'm going to discuss is the money supply, which is the amount of money available in the economy. And this money supply is managed by the Federal Reserve System in the United States, which is also known as the Fed. So knowing that the Federal Reserve controls the money supply is very crucial to understanding the liquidity preference model. So this model shows the quantity of money people want to hold as a function of the interest rate. And that can be a little bit difficult to understand, but it's a lot clearer when you actually look at a graph, which we'll do in a second. So yeah, but that's just the definition of it. So two things to note though, the money demand curve slopes downward. And again, we'll see that in a second. And then the money supply curve is, again, set by the Federal Reserve, and that is just a straight vertical line. So here is the actual liquidity preference model. So this is what the graph will look like without any like shifts or movement or anything. This is just the base graph, what you start with. So I'm going to go ahead and just label a few things just because I think it's important to understand everything that you're looking at. So then you can apply it to some of these different scenarios, I guess. So on the y-axis here, you are going to find the interest rate. And on the x-axis, you're going to find the quantity of money right there. Okay, and then as we discussed above, right here, so that money demand curve is going to slope downward. So that is this line right here, that downward sloping line, right? And then the money supply curve is set by the Federal Reserve, and that money supply curve we said was going to be that vertical line. And here it is right here in the graph. So now you know what all the different parts are, and then with that we can go ahead and analyze different scenarios and different things that occur with this model. So just a second ago, we were talking about how this operates as like a function. So like, for example, right here, the higher is the interest rate is the lower the quantity of money demanded. So you can actually see that pretty clearly on the graph if you come down here. So like when the interest rate is higher, so let's say like it's pretty high, it's like right here on that mark. So that's going to align with right here on the graph. And then the quantity of money held is going to be like down here, right? So that interest rate, when that's high, the quantity of money held is going to be really low. And then like if the interest rate were to go down, like down here, then it would align like over here on the graph, right? So then the quantity of money would be a lot more that people would hold when the interest rate's lower. So that just kind of shows the relationship between this graph, and I think that's really important to understand and realize. One thing that I do want to mention as well is that when these two lines intersect, so the monetary supply and monetary demand, the point at which they intersect right here is going to be your E1, and that will change depending on shifts in the lines, but I just felt like that was something important to note. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the shifts that do occur in this graph. So when the contractionary monetary policy is utilized, it is when the money supply is decreased to lower aggregate demand. So that money supply right here, this vertical line, is going to decrease. So we know that that means that it's going to shift to the left. Right, so it shifts to the left. And you can see now that the point of intersection is going to be up here. So we'll label that E2. And then you can also see that this is going to correlate to different points on the X and Y axis. So you can see that this interest rate is actually going to increase, and the quantity of money held demanded is going to fall. So now let's look at the other monetary policy that is used, which is the expansionary monetary policy. And this is basically the opposite. So it's when the money supply is increased to raise aggregate demand. So this money supply is going to increase. So we know that that means it's going to shift to the right. So this time the intersection is going to be over here. So we'll call this point E3. and it again aligns with different points on the graph. So you can see that this interest rate from the original is going to fall, and the quantity of money held demanded is going to increase. Something that I do want to bring up in the graph is, so monetary policy is more efficient if demand for money is inelastic, rather than if it's elastic, then it's not going to be as effective. So just to kind of show that on the graph here. So if you were to continue to use the expansionary policy and shift this graph more outward, right? Keep moving this line. What's going to happen is, you can probably already see it, but this change from this point to this point to this point is very small, right? There's not that much room. So you want to be really careful with this, because what can occur is something that is called the liquidity trap. But basically in the liquidity trap, it's where that interest rate is close to zero. So you can see up here that interest rate with all these different points right here, it just keeps approaching zero. So when it's really close to zero, you really the expansionary policy isn't very effective. So that's why we want to keep our interest rates generally between 2 to 3%, on average, just so we have room to use both of these policies without facing potentially the liquidity trap. Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about some of the factors that shift the demand and supply of money. So some of the factors that shift demand, so an increase in price level and an increase in income level are both going to increase the demand for money. And those are just two primary examples. And then the factors that are going to shift the supply of money, we said the monetary policy is established by the Fed. That is going to affect and shift the supply of money, as we've previously seen. So let's take a look at an example problem that kind of encompasses a lot of the things we've talked about with the liquidity preference model. So in this question, the Federal Reserve decides to raise the interest paid on reserves. So first of all, we need to try to figure out what that's going to affect. And we know that if the Federal Reserve controls the supply of money, so we know that this is going to affect the supply, right? So that vertical line, that blue line. So if they raise the interest paid on reserves, that basically just encourages banks to keep more of the money as reserves rather than lending it out. And that basically reduces the amount of money in the economy, which in turn decreases the money supply, basically, right? So that is going to be a shift in S1. We'll call that now S2, and we'll shift it to the left. Okay, so once we've done that, so we can see that our original equilibrium where these two lines intersected was right here. So we'll call that R1 and this Q1, right? So after the shift, though, what happened is our new equilibrium is going to be right here. So we'll call that E2. And that is also going to have different points. So you can see that our R1 to R2, that goes up, right? So the interest rates increased, and our Q1 to Q2, that decreased. So we can go ahead now and answer some of the questions. So for A, the money supply, right, we said that decreased because S1 shifted left to now what is S2. So that is a decrease in the money supply. We see right here that the interest rates increase. And then down here, we see that the quantity of money in the economy is going to decrease. And finally, the money demand curve, right? That's this line right here. I'm highlighted in green. Nothing happens to that curve, so we can just say that there is no change. And then I forgot this, but again, I said for part C, that decreases. So yeah, there's the answers to that question.